music for today's episode of the Blackman and Robin Irregular game show was provided by Amos Wenger. You can find more of his work at amos.me/sounds. Today on the Blackman and Robin Irregular game show, we'll be using a popular city building game to model a serious real-world problem. We'll also be giving away a Steam gift card, so be sure to stick with us. Cities Skylines is a fantastic city building game. In Cities Skylines, you're the mayor of a city, obviously, and you're responsible for building roads, zoning areas for living or business or industry, and managing the city's finance. It's tricky, addictive, and a fantastically well-designed city builder in a market sorely in need of them. Especially considering the disappointment that was the last SimCity, Cities Skylines fills a much-needed niche in the market. As a result of the game being wanted and the game being, well, good, it's gotten great critical response and a lot of response from fans. Overall, Cities Skylines makes people happy. You know what doesn't make people happy?
Income inequality.
Too intense? Yeah, maybe a little bit too intense, but my point still stands. While income inequality is being discussed in various documentaries, news reports, and other forums, it's not often that video games tackle the subject. How can you make an engaging experience of economic injustice? That's a tricky thing in itself. Can a game that wasn't built for it, however, be used to understand and perhaps make a statement on income inequality? Let's find out. I started a fresh game of Cities Skylines and began building a nice, wealthy part of town on one side of a river. It has green power thanks to windmills situated away from the city to prevent noise pollution, plenty of jobs thanks to factories and stores, schools for education, and parks for recreation. Of course, the most important services, fire, police, medical, are near most of the homes, while garbage disposal is kept near the industrial zone to inconvenience as few folks as possible. With a bit of time, my city becomes profitable. Tax money begins pouring in from the residential areas, from the industrial places, and of course from the stores. The people are happy, but there's still a lot of demand for new residential areas, new places to shop, and of course new industrial areas. The factories and stores need workers and shoppers. These workers and shoppers need houses. City Skylines didn't ask me to do this, but I decided to do it anyway. I zoned these new areas on the other side of the river. I imagined that the people of the nice half of town didn't want new residential zones going up. Perhaps, thanks to internal politics and a little fear-mongering, they're xenophobic and don't want to have anything to do with new people coming into town. What's a mayor to do? Put in new housing, away from the old. While Cities Skylines doesn't have mechanics for I don't want new neighbors, or xenophobic inhabitants or corrupt politicians that accept corporate bribes, it's necessary for the sake of things to imagine that's the case. Thus, along the road in the city's unoccupied area, the poor half of town was built. I zoned for housing, industrial, and business, with little regard for the quality of life for inhabitants. Sure, the factories are inconvenient places for getting to work. Just imagine how much money companies will save when they don't have to pay employees enough money for gasoline. But because of their proximity to homes, pollution from the factories would inevitably lead to people falling ill. With demand for a certain demographic of people filled on one side of the town, I continued to favor the nice side with carefully arranged zones. Much of the industrialism in the nice side of town became focused on agriculture, which isn't a terrible blight on the land. I continued working on the poor side of town, and I decided that it was necessary to institute some policies. The first thing that I did was legalize drugs. It's good for bringing in all sorts of folks. The tourism dollars certainly are nice, and we don't have to deal with any of those nasty drugs on the nice side of town. But it also increased crime. Initially, it didn't actually cause any problems, and the extra money was nice, so I hung on to the policy. Next, I instituted recycling, which would reduce the need for garbage trucks to come by the poor side of town, though it also reduced tax income a little. I also made smoke detectors mandatory since I'd not be putting a fire station on that side of town for a while. I may be a harsh experimenter, but I'm not evil. Eventually, people started getting sick and dying on the poor side of town, mostly due to living in such close proximity to factories, and it became necessary to blow some money on a clinic just to keep the people alive. Also, their electrical grid was kinda terrible. I tried fixing it by popping in another wind turbine, albeit one a little too close to the houses, and it worked sometimes. Soon enough, though, I got sick of the power outages and dropped in a coal power plant. Naturally, I put it far too close to the population center, and funnily enough, it couldn't run at full capacity due to a lack of fuel, but it did add to the pollution on that side of the city, thus creating more sick people. Now, in spite of the smoke detectors, because the fire station was all the way at the other side of the river, structures burning down was still a frequent problem. A burned down building does not bring in tax revenue, hence, a burned down building is not profitable. I continued work on my city. I kept the poor half sick and uneducated, and without access to firemen or even a graveyard. Well, eventually a graveyard when folks started dying left and right. And eventually, crime took hold, buildings became abandoned, and the bad half of town became an awful place to live. Perhaps the most interesting thing that happened is that having a poor and mismanaged half of the city created a strain on the whole city's resources. For instance, hearses that took the dead from the poor half of the city over to the graveyard lost a lot of time crossing the bridge. The constant loss of buildings from fire and abandonment also made it hard to maintain industry across the city. Then, too, the unhappiness generated by the poor and sick reduced tax income generated. After all, if folks aren't happy, then they're not spending money. Less money spent means less tax revenue. People who didn't feel safe, and people who were unemployed and didn't have enough education, these people weren't making the city quite as much money. Returning to the realm of imaginary causes, it's easy to imagine that these people on the poor side of the bridge deserve whatever they get. It's easy to imagine the voice of a snobby denizen of the rich side of the bridge saying, "Well, these people aren't contributing to the city now, are they? They have crime, unemployment, and no education. Clearly they're bad people. We shouldn't waste any valuable taxpayer money trying to help them." This is the sort of thinking that led to a great many deaths during the Irish potato famine during the mid-1800s. Essentially, the idea was that people were poor and starving and it was all their own fault. Hence the reason why Ireland didn't receive much aid. While it is true that much tragedy could have been averted if Ireland grew other crops, that fact really doesn't avert the truth that it was wrong to leave people to starve. It's the same situation in this town. In this case, people are suffering on account of mismanagement and corruption, or at least that's what we imagined, but does that make it right to leave this half of the city in such a terrible state? Besides the very real cost in human suffering, the lack of tax revenue and the additional strain that the poor put on the system just isn't good for the city as a whole. The income inequality I created resulted in a state of diseconomy. By making the people miserable, cutting off their access to crucial services, education, and opportunities, I managed to damage my city's productivity and value in the long term. So what could I do about it? I decided to start fixing things. I installed a hospital, fire station, high school, and elementary school. I even added an extra road to the dump, making it easier for the waste disposal services to reach those in need. The results? Crime went down, happiness rose, and the city became more profitable. But that's not all I did. I installed parks and began rezoning. Though kicking out factories did initially cost me a bit of tax revenue, in the long run it resulted in healthier citizens. The end result was that there was extra money in the coffers thanks to the strain taken off the system. The city became happier and more profitable, and more people moved in, though seeing as the demand was already high for housing, I'm sure it was bound to happen anyway. As a result, the city reached level 5. Thanks to this, additional opportunities for the city as a whole, as well as for its citizens, were opened up. it became possible to install new monuments as well as to zone for new areas that would expand business in the city. Adding access to important services didn't mark the end of my problems. In spite of the additional help, the strain that was put on the infrastructure of the city eventually took its toll, and the stress on the healthcare system became evident when everybody suddenly became sick and died. I thus wound up with a city of the dead. Everybody was dead. This put a damper on my tax revenue. I've still not figured out how to solve this city of the dead problem, but I'll get back to you when I figure that out. But that marks the end of our experiment for today. Now, this is all a very reductive way of looking at income inequality. I'm pretty sure most city planners don't zone housing near dangerous industrial zones out of pure malice, and I'm sure that nobody's quite so stupid as to create neighborhoods that spawn crime and poverty on purpose. But corruption exists. As I speak, there are people at work siphoning off money from charities. Money that's supposed to be going towards education, money towards proper city planning, money that should be going towards improving the lives of citizens, too often is pocketed by crooks. There are many causes of income inequality and many reasons why it continues to be a problem. What I learned about it from City Skylines is that it's a sticky problem. The longer it goes on, the more difficult it becomes to correct. The greater damage is done to society as a whole. And that income inequality is fueled by a number of factors, such as a lack of educational resources, poor access to healthcare and other vital services, as well as, believe it or not, bad planning and environmental factors. I don't have a solution to income inequality. I'm just a guy playing video games. But maybe you do? And maybe you can show us what you think using a game? Try creating a model of income inequality in a game. It can be any game. And then try coming up with a solution of your own. It doesn't matter how crazy it is, we want to hear about your ideas. Once you've created it, hit us up at Blackman and Robin on Twitter, or send an email to info@blackmanandrobin.com with the subject line, Income Inequality in Games, and attach an explanation of what you did. You could write a blog post about what game you used and how you used it, or you could make a video or a sequence of screenshots, or even send us a save file from a game. Whatever it is, we want it. If we especially like what you make, you'll be in the running to win a $20 Steam gift card and a little something extra cool from Blackman and Robin. The deadline for entry is August 19th, 2015, so get to work today. That's it for this episode of the Blackman and Robin Irregular Game Show. Be sure to follow at Blackman and Robin on Twitter for all the latest game news, reviews, previews, and interviews. Be sure to follow me at Jordan_Cameron for my other views.